So the first thing is we wanted to start out with why. What are we doing? Why are we looking at the communities of practice as a role in Pitt County Schools?
So we're going to go back here to some of the early research Marzano did. I guess at the turn of the century is where we're going back. We're going 15 years here. And he was really looking at what is it that has a big impact on student learning. And so this was the projection he did. You know, if you have a student that starts at the 50th percentile, right, and they have for 3 years, average teachers in an average school, they're going to stay at the 50th percentile. And we know that, okay? And then he said, okay, well, and if you have, you know, 3 years of a highly ineffective teacher in a highly ineffective school, we know that they drop. His research showed us that we drop actually from the 50th to the 3rd percentile. It's pretty significant, right? And the other end of that is what we all also know. If you have a highly effective teacher in a highly effective school for 3 years, you go from the 50th to 96th percentile. Now, we also know that not every teacher is going to be a highly effective teacher, right? We said, well, what if you have a highly ineffective teacher in a highly effective school? So these are your lower performing teachers, but it's a great school. The school actually mitigates some of that loss. So instead of dropping from the 50th to the 3rd percentile, that student will drop from the 50th to the 37th. So a decrease, but not quite as bad. Similarly, if you have a highly effective teacher in a highly ineffective school, okay, so these are struggling schools, but these are our star teachers, they'll grow. Not as much as a highly effective teacher in a highly ineffective school, but they'll grow from the 50th to the 63rd percentile. The thing that really rocked everyone's kind of research is when he said, well, what happens if you have an average teacher, but in a highly effective school? An average teacher in a school where there's a team that comes together and they work, and they plan, and they study, and they learn. And what he found is that an average teacher in a highly effective school, which is, you know, average teachers are the most likely teachers we're going to get as a student, 3 years of that actually gives you more growth for a student than having a highly effective teacher for 3 years in that ineffective school. Which just, I mean, it was astounding when the research came out. And so what we started to do was say, okay, well, how can we help create, you know, how can we grow our teachers to become highly effective teachers? Because that's, you know, ideally what you want. And how do we also start growing highly effective schools? Because most of us are average, like that's by definition. So how do we start to change the environment to support other teachers so that we can all grow together? And that's really what led to the birth of these different roles within R3.
And I would say actually SAS by statistical design makes the majority of teachers average. So even if you're effective as the, you know, as everything rises up, the average is there. Part of it is looking at, so what do we do? What's going on? And so the first thing is we have to start slow to go fast. And don't wait. Don't wait for a grant, because the first time we actually came up with some of these ideas, the first time we convened, we had effective teachers upstairs on the 3rd floor of the Pitt County School boardroom, or Board of Education, which used to be a hospital, by the way. It's sort of an old building. And we were in a big room. We had an instructional coach facilitate them. Tom and I came in to have things. We stepped out so the teachers could just talk. So the first time we did that and made a proposal to the state, the General Assembly did nothing with it. And that's okay. Because then we got to do another one. We got to implement some programs. We got to get things rolling. So the idea is start slow to go fast and don't wait around. What can you do on the local level with local money, with local businesses and partners to get things rolling? So what we did is we actually started in 2016 with a program called the KBT program. We're not going to go in depth about this, but no, this is a 1-year program designed to engage and empower our beginning teachers to become collaborators and leaders with other beginning teachers. Sometimes these beginning teachers want to save the world, and we want that, right? We want to encourage that, and also don't want to squash them and overburden them. So how do we focus on that? How do we make sure that we're able to, in 1 year, engage them? The coolest thing is we end that program with them going to Raleigh, so they can tell powerful narratives. We teach them how to tell stories, so that the leaders and the people that are empowered, that can actually change the rules, can actually do something about it. And these legislators, when we go back to next year, they remember the stories. And that's had a powerful impact on our teachers. So hopefully once COVID lessens, we can keep going back to Raleigh. And what we're trying to do now is how do we do it locally? so we don't stop, we don't make excuses. But 1 year to engage our KBTs, our beginning teachers really right there from the very beginning.
Second thing we developed was what we call the Teacher Leadership Institute, which is a 2-year training program to help teachers grow in their leadership ability. And then for the 2 years after that, we actually pay them an internal stipend. So this was before, we developed this before any of the advanced teaching roles and differentiated pay stuff came out. So it was our attempt to give teachers a little bit of money for training. We realized that we could not sustain that long term because, you know, the more teachers you get in there, the more you gotta pay. So what we did is basically in lieu of a 3rd year of the supplement, we took the 3rd year of the supplement, we converted that, and we said, well, we'll pay for teachers to get national board certification. We'll pay the fees on the national board side because the state will then give the rates. So it was a way for us to continually add to our pool of national board teachers, to help teachers, particularly some of our strongest teacher leaders, give them support moving into national boards and then sustain the program long term. After the Teacher Leadership Institute, the first of our ATR roles then is the facilitating teacher and the community of practice. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of this because we're going to go deep a little bit in the meeting. Just know that facilitating teachers, currently they get a $5,000 supplement. Their role is to facilitate or lead a group of other teachers who we call collaborating teachers. Those collaborating teachers and the facilitating teacher work together on a collaborative inquiry project. Think action research at the school level, individual classroom, and they're the ones that do that over time.
I think the other thing about this is from the grant, we actually pay them more. And so we had to figure out what's a price that will engage our teachers and compensate them for the work they're doing, because it's a lot of work. And what's a price that we can actually sustain as a district. So if you look at one facilitating teacher and 4 collaborating teachers, it's roughly just under $12,000 or $13,000. Basically $13,000 can sustain one community practice. If I'm looking at a school or if I'm looking at a district level, what am I looking at? And that's to impact 5 teachers to do it. The other thing then is the other role that we're not going to talk about today is the multi-classroom teacher. This is slightly different than opportunity culture as a multi-classroom leader because at every school in Pitt County we have an instructional coach. So one of the things we did when we started this was we needed to take those instructional coach duties and keep them separate. So our role is slightly different than the multi-classroom leaders you see across the state. We're actually talking about now how do we hybrid, how do we go back and forth, what programs do we take, so we're looking at this. This is an effective program for a teacher who is an effective teacher working with a novice or underperforming teacher. They give up their classroom. They go, for example, if they were a 3rd grade teacher with fabulous scores, they go into a classroom, they work with anywhere from 2 to 4, actually we have some working with 6 co-teachers. They co-teach, they co-plan, they co-assess with all their teachers, and so what they do is they help build the capacity of that co-teacher. So that way in a year or 2, hopefully a year, but in a year or 2, that teacher learns what they need to learn from that expert, and then they're able to grow and continue to teach throughout the rest of their career. So you take a novice or underperforming teacher and do that. With benefits, by the way, the multi-classroom teacher, one of those teachers, is about the same as the community practice, just under $13,000 you can sustain. The thing we're looking at is the first 2 are the pipeline programs. We learned from Charlotte right there from the beginning, you cannot wave a magic wand and voila, you have teacher leaders. You gotta engage them, you gotta train them, and more importantly, you have to give them opportunities to lead. So that's what the KBT program and TLI are able to do. And that was key for us. We did those, by the way, with no grant money at all. I think that local businesses helped us. The Educational Foundation helped us. We had Grady White, the Smith Foundation helped us. We had the Reynolds, one of the Reynolds Foundation, wasn't it? I think helped us, so we submitted smaller grants to get some of these roles. Really, they're high quality good programs. But we started with a pipeline to get them ready before we had the advanced roles. So let's do this, if you could, real quick. From this quick overview, what gets your attention? What are you curious about learning more as we go forward? So just talk at your table real quick. What got your attention? What are you curious about learning more? So the next thing is to dive deeper into the communities of practice.
All All right, so when we talk about communities of practice, we've identified a couple of what we call essential elements. The first one here is that it's all about adult collaboration, right? And one of the things we've learned through experience is that even though we think big people know how to collaborate, generally we don't collaborate as well as we think we do. So much of our training, much of our support is designed around how do we help groups come together to be able to work together? How do they communicate in effective ways? So we identify what we call the 7 norms of collaboration. You'll see it hanging right there, and I think back in that corner as well. And what we're really trying to do through those norms is to say, how can we create a psychologically safe environment? How can we create environments where people feel safe to be vulnerable? Because those two things come together. And what we work with the teachers on is that it doesn't happen overnight, right? I can't be vulnerable unless I feel safe. And until I feel safe, I won't ever be vulnerable. And it's like, well, wait a minute. So where do we start? Well, we start with little wins. Like, how do we slowly start to build trust? How do we slowly start to build safety? And as people experience that, then they become more and more vulnerable. And so it takes time. And so when we say sometimes you gotta go slow to go fast, what we're talking about is the first thing with any new COP that we're gonna focus on is not the data. It's not the problem of practice we identify. It's getting and coming together to build a safe community so that we can accelerate through the data because we trust each other. The second thing is talking about that data. How can we clarify the instructional problem practice? Like, we like to say these big things, right? You know, 3rd grade reading, 4th grade math, student engagement, right? These are really big, and it's hard to make progress when you're looking at big things. So how do we take that big idea and focus it down to a very specific research question? And we look at the data to develop what that research question is. And we teach a process that you're going to experience a little bit today on how to look at data, different ways to look at data, and different ways to talk about that. All right, and then the third essential is how can we implement ongoing support? Well, one of the things we believed before we started the program was that ongoing coaching was going to be very critical and essential to success, but it was just a belief we had, right? It was something that we anecdotally kind of thought. And so over time, as we've had our external program evaluator come in, and we've just asked her the question, like, just start telling us what's working, what do the teachers identify? One of the things that comes up over and over and over again in the data that she collects, and trust me, there's sometimes data she collects that is not what we want to hear, but we still like we need to know it. One of the things that she collects over and over again is the power of the coaching and the ongoing support that the teacher leaders receive. So there's a protocol we have where they have, regular coachings that are established by time period, and then there's just an on-needed basis. And most of our people are getting called all the time to come and model, to come facilitate, come problem solve, just really support the teachers. So when we talk about the process that these COPs go through, it's what we call a cycle of inquiry. And in this cycle of inquiry, and this is what you'll experience later, they develop what we call 2 theories. As they look at the data, they start to understand the data. And we have to remind people that data has no meaning except what we bring to it. And so one of the first things we have to discover is, well, what's the meaning that we're bringing to it that could be clouding our interpretation? And then when we can take that away and just actually look at the data itself, we start to asking the question and answering it, what might be causing the data to look like this? And so they develop what we call a theory of causation. Because we're not trying to fix the data, like we're trying to fix whatever it is that's impacting the data. So they come up with this theory of causation that identifies kind of what are those driving forces, and they pick one, and from that they develop a theory of action. And the theory of action is where we get to be like, now what are our next steps? Within that, they've only got a couple choices, and one of them is I need more data. Like we've got some questions that aren't answered yet. The second one is, oh my gosh, we think we have an idea of what's going on, but we don't have any idea what to do about it. So we need to go do some research. So they'll do research articles, go interview people, just find places to learn from. And then the third part of that is identifying the actual intervention that they're going to try for some actions. From there, they continue to refine that driving question to continue digging deeper and deeper and come to more clarity. So when we talk about the data itself, over time, we kind of developed this model that has helped our teachers, and we call it different levels of data. One's the macro data, and one's the micro data. And when we say macro data, we mean data that's comparison level data, whereas micro data is the actual intervention data. So an example we give them sometimes is one, we'll pick a strategy, or we'll pick a problem of practice that maybe is a little bit harder to track, like graduation rates, right? It's hard to do work all year long and track progress on graduation rates because you don't get the data until the end of the year, right? It's also the same with BOGs too, right? Okay, so you don't get the data until the end of the year. So how do we know if we're making any progress? Well, that's where the theory of causation and the theory of action come in. And one group may say, you know what, we're realizing that if students are failing in these 3 classes, like we're seeing a correlation between that and graduation data. So we're going to implement some strategies in these classes to target them. And then we can track that strategy over time, and using the data we collect, because there's a strong correlation, we can start to make some predictions that, you know what, we're on track that our graduation rates may go up. Or we're not showing any movement here. Probably not going to impact the graduation rates yet. So let's go back to the table and figure out what else we're doing. So they track these 2 levels of data. And then one, like I said, is for comparison, because then we can look at, well, what's happening at other schools or with other students that are not having the same intervention.
One of the ahas for me personally was that comparison data. The first year we had communities of practice and they started reporting. They would show that, for example, I'm reading 3D back then, right? It was a matter of this student went up from this level to this level. I'm like, okay, what does that mean? So the idea that she brought to us was we gotta have something to compare it with so that we know, is that data much better, less than, what's going on with it? So that comparison data was a good aha for me as we went through. So the idea here is we started this, we didn't know everything. We started learning and refining, started supporting them as they went through.
The last thing that we've implemented, and this came about as a result of the feedback and the request of the facilitating teachers, was to develop what we call the roadmap. And the roadmap just sort of identifies benchmarks along the way, think of road signs, some ideal strategies and timing. And what we did is we actually went back and we didn't develop this on just on our own. What we did is we looked at those FTs and those COPs that seemed to us to be the most successful. And then we started asking them, what are the things you're doing and when were you doing it? And then we found where there was this commonality between them, and that's when we started saying, okay, so we've studied success, now we're gonna put that success into place for other people. And that's been very effective and very, very helpful. The last thing you'll see there is we do have an annual progress report that FTs do for their schools. So those have been published recently, the last few years on LiveBinder. They hate LiveBinder, so we're getting rid of it. We don't know what it's going to look like yet, but we know it's going away because that feedback is also overwhelming. And the idea here is how do they share this out with people at their school, and then how do we also make the results available to other schools so that they can see them.
So given that overview of the communities of practice, in just a moment, you're gonna have an opportunity to talk to some principals, you're gonna have an opportunity to talk to some teachers, some FTs that are actually doing it. So just real quick, if you would, whether it's with a pair, with a partner, or individually, what are some things you're curious about and want to ask some questions about later on in this session? Okay, so just what are some things you're curious about and want to make sure you ask questions about? Take about 45 seconds to do that either individually or with a partner. So I think part of it is also making sure that you realize, all right, you got some time to answer those questions. And instead of Tom and I being the ones answering, hopefully it's the people in the ground and doing some of the work. Okay. So keep that going as you go on. Next thing is lessons learned. Dr. Linker said this year, actually, our federal grant ends now as of the end of this week. September 30th, and Dr. Linker said the school board and Dr. Linker especially said, all right, this is working. So the trick is, all right, so why do they think that? Why are they willing to invest district dollars, school dollars, invest in the staff to make this work? So here's some things as far as what's working with regards to students. Number one, EVOS was one of the things we definitely looked at. We had to. There was a positive correlation between the collaborating teachers compared to non-collaborating teachers. So not the facilitating teachers, because to be a facilitating teacher, you had to be positive, green, or blue. The collaborating teachers working with them where teachers, they were green, some of them were actually in the negative green, so within that range, the trick is, all right, so we wanted to look at those teachers. Not the ones we looked at, but one level down. And we found that it was statistically significant. That can be found in some of the evaluation. The other key thing, and I'll show you this graph, is there was a reduction in the schools that did not meet growth. And here's what that looks like. So you take all the schools, 2016-17, it says pre-grant, but it's actually pre-ATR, pre-advanced teaching program. So it started in 16. The first year is year 0. That's a trick we learned actually from Friday Institute guy. What was that? Trick Stallings. The first year is the planning year, that's year 0, right? We didn't have any roles in place. So then look at actually 17-18 to 18-19, and really look at the red schools. Schools that did not meet growth, going from 13 to 4. That was pretty powerful. Now the thing is, to be upfront, is there were a lot of other things we did as a district. Our curriculum department was on board, the principals were rock and rolling, individual schools were rock and rolling, and we had these teachers rock and rolling as well, starting to get going. So the idea is this is one of the things we looked at as we go through. And then the number of green schools, which is schools that met growth from 13 to 20. Again, that's something that our school boards have got their attention. Okay? And we'll look at it and see. And now we're sort of curious to see what it looks like now, post-COVID, post all this other stuff. But that got our attention that some things are working. And again, this goes back to that first slide, looking at how they affect their schools. The better the schools are, that's what's impacting. So how do we look at that? So the other thing then, I'm just going to click through these. You talking these, right? Yep, I'm going to click. You go.
Okay. All right, so one of the things we asked our evaluator to look at was not only what's working, but why is it working? Like when you start digging down and figuring out, because we've all had experiences where, you know, you hear from a school or a principal or a teacher or a district, hey, we did X. I'm like, X is go by the program. Okay, and then here's the results we got. And then we go and do it and we don't get the same results. And well, part of that is because it's not just the program itself. It's like, what are the things that are driving it? How's it implemented? What are the thoughts and processes and beliefs that underlie all that stuff? So we really wanted to know what's coming through in the data. So one of the things that came through when she talked with them, and as we looked at it, was this whole idea, again, we've said 2 times now, going slow to go fast. And again, when we talk about that, what we're talking about is you're taking time to really dig deep. You're taking time to come together as a community, because until you trust each other, you're never going to be able to work together on a problem. Because sometimes the problem, when you look at it, you go, oh my gosh, what do I need to change? Well, you know, if I have to admit there's a problem, you know, that I don't know what I'm doing, I need to have a safe place to do that. The second thing we did was what we called supporting self-directedness. And this was really about how can we develop leaders who are self-directed leaders. You see, self-directed leaders know how to self-manage, self-monitor, and self-modify. So they can set a goal for themselves, and they can help manage their way along that. They actually self-monitor to know, are they making progress toward that goal? Like, we don't have to do it for them. How do we move accountability and data from something that's something that's done to us to something that we start taking responsibility for? So it's that transition from accountability to responsibility. Because see, we always have to hold people accountable, then we don't have responsible people in our midst. So how do we self-manage, self-monitor, and then when we self-monitor and realize things are either not going like they want or they are going like we want, we can modify our own ideas and behaviors. So we had to give them the autonomy to do that, which took a lot of trust on our part too, like trust them. Finally, the other why was we had this ongoing external program evaluator. Originally, when we did the RFP, we thought it would be an annual evaluation. We actually moved to quarterly evaluations where she came in. And she would write quarterly reports for us and then report back to us and to the grant leadership team, which included senior staff. And from that, we would identify strategies. Okay, what do we do right now? What tweaks can we make? So the ways we did this was we did a lot of training. And within our training, because training, let's be honest, is expensive. All of you that contract consultants know that. And that was not something we knew we'd be able to maintain after the grant was over. So we really focused on only trainings that we could certify internal trainers for. And we generally ask for, we don't want to train the trainer model of here, come to this one day overview of the PowerPoint and we hand you the PowerPoint, because we also know from research that's not very effective and it doesn't last long term. We actually invested in trainers who would mentor us, help us learn the content, develop our skills as presenters, and that would sometimes take months or a year or two to go through some of those processes. And yet the feedback we got from participants was that the training they were getting was really powerful, they were learning, and it was relevant. Second, we continue to support our district coaches. That was one of the things that came through loud and strong in the evaluation report. So when we looked at sustainability post-grant, we had to figure into the budget, how are we going to sustain the district supports? The data was so clear that, senior staff said, listen, we can't just have the teachers out there on their own because we're not sure it's going to work if we just let them be on their own. So we're going to have some district level people. Well, district level people cost a lot more than a supplement for a couple teachers, right? And we had to kind of look at how we're going to support that build that. And then finally, we built a lot of external partners. So Best NC is one. We've had some local businesses, we've had some businesses, different businesses around the country who work with us that we partnered with. And sometimes they'll give us training for discounted rates because they understand and buy what we're doing. They always, we're willing to invest in us, develop our own trainers. But those external partners became really, really great.
So that's some of that. The next thing is, all right, so we had this grant, and one of the things that was probably an issue maybe when we started talking about some of the things we did prior to this year was, all right, you guys got 20 million, of course you can do anything. The answer is no. The trick now is, all right, we're sustaining it beyond. So what are some of the things we sustain? We had to figure out, and Linker said this, what works, continue it. The great stuff, there was some good stuff that we decided not to continue. It worked, but we decided not to, so we could keep the great stuff. And that was one of the key aha. So one is we have communities of practices that have been sustained beyond the grant. We learned from Charlotte that we have a 3-year process. Everyone ended this year with the grant. So there is no continuation. Because sometimes you have a really good teacher who is not a really good facilitating teacher. It's hard to say you're not there anymore. What's easier to say is it ends now and schools have to identify new. And then it's easier to say, let's look at this new problem or this new thing. That was a key thing. So there was a clear ending in sight, so that way it's not a continuation to have good people when we need great people. The other thing is we sustained 52 communities of practice. That's an investment. 225 teachers were impacted just with facilitating teachers. So looking at how we were able to do this was one of the things that Dr. Linker and the school board support was key. Using lots of different funding sources and then dealing with, and honestly, and this is one of the things I'm going to talk to PPI about, is how do we then coordinate between Title I and advanced teaching roles and how we fund this and what is supplanting and what is not. Those are things we really, really have to talk about because there were some issues that hit us square about 3 months ago. We worked through it, but we need to talk about those things as well. We have 13 multi-classroom teachers, which is that other role. 7 schools continued out of the 15. 6 new multi-classroom teachers were invested in. So this is some schools said it worked. And one of the schools actually was a school that we don't have any other teachers that need a multi-classroom. So our time is better spent with another community of practice so they could switch how they wanted to spend their money. And that was pretty cool to see as we go through that. And then the district support staff was sustained. That was key to make sure we did that. Everything was reduced. We don't have grant money. We're not as big as we used to be. So we're a lot more lean now. How can we do that? How can we be effective? So I'm gonna just real quick click here so we can stay on track. And then I'll give you some time to talk about. Recommendations. One is connect and collaborate, not only within the district, but across districts. Tom is in EPS, which is our curriculum department. I'm in human resources. So the trick is we had to collaborate a lot between our own departments. That's the whole reason we created the used to be the division. Now we're actually the department. So in other words, we had to collaborate together. Making sure we have opportunities to learn. What are some professional learning opportunities to learn with and from each other? This is one of those key things. I think we have to defray the cost of training. You can't pay anywhere from $3,000 to $5,000 a day to have a world-class trainer come in if you don't have that, which is what Tom talked about as far as you got to partner with other districts. We got to actually train our own people so that way now, when we do adaptive schools and cognitive coaching and data-driven dialogue, we do. All we have to do is pay for the books, which reduces the cost like 90-some%. So it's dramatic how you do that. Also making sure that we schedule flexibility. Our biggest cost right now and one of our biggest hiccups is we can't pull teachers out of schools to train. And so we've actually even modified the schedule this year because it's so hard with COVID to find subs. Instead of being able to train 50 teachers at a time, we can't do that because we can't find those subs. Principals have said that. So we've actually, the first step was reduce the number of teachers we pull out. So we're maxing our trainings at about 30. The other thing then we're going to look at is, do we actually spread it out even more to reduce it more? The thing we do not want to do is say we can't train teachers anymore. When we stop investing in our teachers, then the pipeline slows down. We got to figure that out. So we got to figure that out. So the calendar and calendar flexibility is key. Because if we had another week in the school year that we could expand beyond the deadlines that the state gives us, what if we then had a day every other month for training? And then it's free. Parents get another vacation day with their kids, and our teachers are trained without having to pay $100 or $130 a day for subs, which then the cost goes up. So we're trying to work through that.